Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you are watching on, and they will appear here in my chat room. And tonight is the 2-year anniversary of Tarot Thursday. And I will be appearing as a guest on the program. I hope you will join us for that. And if you like the mini readings that I sometimes do on this program, that is done every week on Tarot Thursday. So I hope that you will tune into that program and perhaps get yourself a mini reading. Today, I started my day, as I often do, wondering what exactly I should talk about on my midday program. And I came across a posting on Facebook that gave me my answer. And as you may have seen, the title of today's program is Wicca, Witchcraft, and Civil Rights. And the posting said that as a Wiccan or witch, you have religious protections. And you must remember this. And it went on at some length about that. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. The problem is, I immediately recognize that this is not a true statement. And hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room, who greets us from rainy and tornado-ridden Oklahoma. The statement that as a Wiccan or witch, you have religious protection in the United States, and I'm speaking only of civil rights in the United States, is not necessarily true. As a Wiccan, yes, you do. Wicca is very strongly recognized in this country, and hello to Arlene Hebert in the chat room. It's good to see you. As a religion, there are numerous Wiccan churches, including the Corellian Nativist Church and the Corellian Church and the Aquarian Tabernacle Church and many others. And hello to Sean Shed Quintus in the chat room. It's good to see you, Sean. And these organizations are clearly recognized. And to some extent, even people who are practicing some form of Wicca but are not necessarily related to a church may be able to claim religious protection. Witchcraft, on the other hand, is not a religion. It's a practice. Even the majority of the people who practice witchcraft do not necessarily define it as a religion. There's a minority that does. But for the most part, when we're talking about witchcraft as a religion, we're talking about Wicca, at least in the United States. This is what all of those witch wars over the word Wicca were fought about in the end. It's why they were important. That's why certain groups, like my own group, were not willing to simply walk away from the word because it became controversial in some areas. We understood that civil rights in this country are tied to that word Wicca, not to looser words like witchcraft or even really paganism. I think paganism would have more room than witchcraft to try to claim religious protection. But even then, paganism is not a religion. It's a group of religions. But there are a number of incorporated churches that identify primarily as pagan, which would make some difference. It'll be a lot harder to push if you're not a member of one of those churches. Now, what does any of this have to do with anything? 4 years ago, 10 years ago, it didn't have so much to do with anything. Under normal circumstances, it really wouldn't have mattered how you defined yourself. You could have claimed religious civil rights protection because the courts generally and the government generally was pretty open in how it was willing to see that. But, you know, we're living in different times now. And with Project 2025 in place, we have every reason to expect that there is going to be some movement against the metaphysical community at some point. And we need to be ready for that. We need to be prepared for that, and we need to be aware of that. And I want to remind you, in case you've forgotten, that I spent all last year warning you about the things that are happening now, when a number of other pagan leaders were telling you, oh, this is nothing to worry about, this could never happen. Actually, I and Ed the Pagan have spent the last 30 years talking about this because it's been coming that long. It was no secret in many parts of society that they wanted to do this and that they were making steady progress towards it. I was often told that I should just shut up about it by members of this community. And I am completely capable of saying now, I told you so. And hello to Janet Gann in the chat room. I realize it's not a particularly winning thing to say, I told you so. It's not a particularly charming stance to take, but it's important when I'm telling you the next thing. And this is one of those next things. We now have to be very careful to make sure that we have the stability we need to deal with the things that are coming in the future, whatever they may be. If you're thinking that you're just going to get through this on general tolerance, that is not a very safe point of view. You should look for a very well-established Wiccan or pagan church to identify with, because they will be able to handle challenges that are made better than any individual will be able to do. For the last almost 50 years, as one of the first priesthood of the Corellian tradition, I made it a point to do everything in my power to pursue sound legal standing. You know, I've had people make all kinds of bizarre accusations against me, including fan fiction books dedicated to it, but I actually made sure that I and we stood on very firm legal ground, as we still do. But not everybody in this community can say that. And some may find themselves on very unstable ground if they're not careful. Just recently, the Wild Hunt ran a story about a satanic leader being arrested and hauled off in handcuffs for trying to do a public ritual at, I believe it was a city council meeting. But whether or not he's able to actually defend against that in court remains to be seen. I'm not sure what his organization was. I'm not entirely sure that might not become a watershed moment for the legal recognition of his movement, depending on exactly who he was. This is something we all need to be mindful of right now. A lot of the legal rights we have, we got through moral equivalency with other groups. And it's very important that our strongest churches maintain that. And, you know, I know there are a lot of people who think that everybody can just do that and it's going to work out for everybody. But, you know, it's not that simple. There are serious legal questions that are going to require numbers and money to answer if they come up. I often talk about the Helms Amendment back in the 1980s, which sought to remove recognition of any religion that used the term witchcraft in describing itself. There's no reason to think they're not going to try to do that again. It was defeated then. If it came up in Congress today, would it be? And what would that mean to us? Now, Arlene says, it was in the lobby of the Kansas building. He originally was going to do it there, and they quickly changed the law, so he was doing so illegally. But we have to expect that this kind of tactic will be used. You'll notice I'm not running out in the street and screaming right now. I don't recommend you do it either, at least not as a representative of your community. As a private person, that's another matter. We need to make sure that our local and communal strength is as strong as we can make it. We need to make sure that our financial and political abilities are as strong as we can make them. because we have no reason to think we're not going to face challenges. It is possible that one way or another we'll avoid it. I am a great believer in magic. Maybe we'll somehow magically avoid it all, but that certainly has not always worked. And I think it would be very foolish to just make that assumption. Instead, we need to look to our own strength, and we need to make sure that we're under the strongest legal barriers we can put ourselves under in case we are in need of those protections. This, in my mind, is one of the things we need to do in the face of Project 2025. And we need to be prepared to zig and zag if we need to make sure that we remain in strong positions. However, there are only a very few of us who are in strong positions because most of our community resolutely refused to put itself in strong positions. And at this point, there's nothing to be done about that. But those of us who did need to make sure that we maintain our positions. We need to make sure that we strengthen our positions. And we need to make sure that we do not behave foolishly, but that we take reasonable actions that move us forward. What are reasonable actions? Reasonable actions include applying pressure in places where it may make a difference, but doing so reasonably and in ways that do not make us look like a bunch of idiots, but do not give more ammunition to those who might want to attack us. We need to be cautious and reasonable and move with deliberation. And we also need to not mistake this for the 1960s. This is a lot closer to Europe in the 1930s, or to that matter, the United States in the 1930s, than it is the 1960s. And we need to consider that in making our decisions. It's not the time to think that we're going to be reenacting the summer of love and expecting a positive result. That's not to say there's nothing that can be done, but we need to be very cautious in how we do it. And hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. Now, there are a lot of things that could happen here. One of them is there may come a thermidor, and in small portions, we're already seeing a little bit of that. And that's when that's when there comes pushback against what's being done. Robespierre never expected to end up on the guillotine, but that is where he died in the month of Thermidor. If you're familiar with history, you know what I'm referring to. If you're not, look it up. It will be very interesting reading. But we are in a position where we know, and hello to Boris Spazovsky in the chat room. Hello, Boris. It's good to see you. We're in a position where we know what's intended. Project 2025 laid it out very bluntly, and it has a lot of supporters. I see a lot of people saying that the things that are currently happening are just what they voted for. I don't think that they're a particularly strong majority, but the fact remains that they've basically taken possession of everything they need to do what they want. And I warned you about this last year. Once the courts were effectively gone, there wasn't a lot to stop them. The only thing that can really stop them now is utter disaster, or rebellion in their own ranks, or if for some reason they suddenly decide to be more respectful of the way things normally work in upcoming elections. But I don't know that we have any reason to expect that. We'll see what happens, but I don't know that we can expect it. I would think we should proceed on the assumption that things will act as they normally do, but be prepared for the possibility they will not. And how do we prepare for that? Why, by making sure that our infrastructure and our legal protections are as strong as we can. And again, that our local positions are as strong as we can make them. Our financial positions are as strong as we can make them. Considering the history of our community, I don't know that that's going to be very strong, but we can do what we are able to do. That we need to maintain our spiritual connections and our practice of magic, and use those skills. But I would never say that you should rely entirely in life on magic. Now, getting back to where I started, and I was talking about the difference in these different terms and what they mean to civil rights. In the United States, Wicca has a long history, under the wide definition of the term, of civil rights protection and recognition as a religion. That's not to say that couldn't be changed, but at least right now it is the case. One of the things that gives one hope is that attempts to change that have often run into the fears of smaller Christian churches that it would be a precedent for damaging their status. And their desire to protect their own position has occasionally protected us as well. But that protection that extends to Wicca under the wide definition of that word, we'll come back to that in a moment, doesn't necessarily extend to just whatever term you want to make up. I once knew someone who wanted to describe himself as a demi-pagan. Yeah, there's no legal precedent protecting the civil rights of a demi-pagan. If that's actually challenged, particularly in a time like the present one, it's going to be hard to defend. This is one of the reasons so many people have clung to that word Wicca. Now, coming back to the wide definition of Wicca, the word Wicca has two spellings, W-I-C-A, which refers particularly to Gardnerian Wicca, and W-I-C-C-A, which is a much wider term that refers to both older and newer branches of related movements, arguably related movements. This is a very important thing to remember. And in this country, the Wiccan churches which established civil rights definitely came from that wider definition and not the smaller one. There's been an attempt over the last 30, 40 years to try to eliminate the wider definition in favor of the smaller one, but that would be absolute legal suicide in this country for this community. You will find that trying to build a case for the civil rights of many of the other terms people use is going to be a lot harder because there are not precedents for it. Not that courts are being all that respectful of precedents at the moment, but again, there are some reasons to think they might be here. And the other thing, of course, and why I keep speaking of making sure that our positions are strong, is if we were to lose our legal protections, then we have to fall back on financial and political protections. Most of our groups have nothing like that, but a few of us do. And those groups need to strengthen themselves as much as they can. These are the things we need to be thinking about, not, as I've said before, writing a strongly written letter to the Times or thinking that we're going to go out with a bunch of homemade signs and suddenly change everything overnight. That is not going to happen. This is a significant fight in which there are things we can do to secure our position, but those things are not among them. At least not the way I see certain people trying to do it. So my advice, if you are part of your local community, is look into what your legal protections are currently, and if they're not strong, find ways to strengthen them so that you can assert your civil rights with strong precedents to back them, and not just based on the assumption that the courts will extend to you religious civil rights based on your claim that you follow a religion that doesn't have legal precedents. because I don't know that that is something we can expect as much in the future as we have to some extent experienced it in the past. Make sure your financial situations are as good as they can be, because you may find yourself having to fall back on them. And above all, make sure your community is as strong as it can be, um, because you're probably going to have to draw upon each other in many ways as we go through this. Now, this is not a happy, fun message, although it's happier than some messages that could be given, because these are concrete things. These are things that can be done. They're not easy things, and for many people in the metaphysical community, it goes against what they want to believe. You know, one of the things I've often talked with Ed the Pagan about is that one of the reasons that he's often faced so much opposition is he likes to barbecue the sacred cows. He is a regular barbecuer of sacred cow burger. What do I mean by that? And the same is true for me, but I tend to be a little more diplomatic about it. And that's that in the pagan community, people often love to cling to assumptions, even when they're shown that they're wrong. Consensus decision-making is one of the ones I most despise. Terrible idea in most situations. And I'm not going to say every situation. If you're a tiny little group that's been together forever, well then consensus decision may work for you. If you're any kind of large group, consensus decision-making is ridiculous. Having a consensus is important. Consensus decision-making, where the disagreement of even one person stops everything, will stop everything. It will make it impossible to deal with any urgent matter. But, you know, people hate to be told that, who've assumed, because they read it in a book somewhere, that this is going to be the perfect answer for them. Large parts of our community are against any kind of leadership or organization. Well, right now we need leadership and organization. What are those people going to do? Particularly if they cannot challenge that belief now. That is the sacred cow. It should be barbecued. Staying away from money altogether. Anything touching money is evil. A lot of people in this community believe that. What do you think you're going to do if you're facing a civil rights challenge and you have no money and no way to raise it? Sacred cow should be barbecued. Should be barbecued right now if you haven't already done that. All of those three things, very bad ideas that should be done away with. I realize that part of that is these people often have very negative definitions of things like leadership, organization, money, that are not true, can be true in bad situations, but are not universally true. And part of this involves shadow work to change those assumptions. But, you know, the time has come to change them, or you're not going to be able to do a damn thing. And if you think, like those people at that long ago festival I so often refer to, that running off alone in the forest to hide is an effective strategy, well, for a few it will be, but not for everybody. And when you get there, alone in the forest, you're alone in the forest. And if you're not effective at hiding, well, you'll be facing your opposition alone. Now is a time we really need to look at the things that have held us back as a community, at the sacred cows that have stopped us from being able to do practical actions to secure our positions. And again, we need to barbecue them. We need to channel our inner Ed the Pagan and barbecue those sacred cows. That is my message to you today. Now, are people going to listen to that? Probably not. But I'll remind you, I spent all last year telling you what was coming, and it's here. We spent 30 years trying to warn you this was coming. You can go back through the morgue of Corellian TV and find numerous reports talking about the rise of Christian dominionism, what is now often called Christian nationalism, becoming a Project 2025, going back years and years. We should have been prepared for this. A few organizations did take some um, steps to prepare for it, but very, very few, because most of them refused to believe what they were being told. Now, I strongly urge you to believe what you're being told, um, because there is no more lead up time. We are here, and we are not in a strong position to oppose anything, but we may be able to survive. And is that a desirable place to be? No, it's not. But it's better than if we didn't have that. But we do need to pay attention to what is necessary to survive. With that, let's have a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors. And hello, this is Rev Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And I would like to invite you to my Don art showing and auction on Friday, May 9th, with original pieces and prints of my artwork and other interesting items, with the auction at 5 p.m. on Whatnot. And please stay tuned for more announcements and examples of art that will be coming. Thank you. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub, Corellian Publishing, and Court of the Five Dragons, and the May 9th Don Art auction. I hope you'll join us for that auction. It will have many pieces of artwork. And I want to thank you for joining me for today's program. And at the risk of gilding the lily, I'm going to repeat my points again. But now is the time that we as individuals and groups need to organize locally and within ourselves. We need to build up our legal, financial, and social protections as much as we can, and our connections with our local communities as much as we can, because that is where we will have um, adversaries or protectors. And anyone who tells you that we should not be doing those things, don't listen to them. They were wrong. They've been wrong all along. Anyone who tells you organization is bad, they have always been wrong. Anyone who tells you dealing with money is bad, they are wrong. They have been wrong all along. The fact that so much of this community has listened to that nonsense is why we're not in a better position to deal with this. And those of us who didn't listen are the ones who are in the best position. Listen to us now. And with that, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in this life that we are living. We rejoice in this walk we walk together. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to recognize what are practical actions and take them to our benefit. Help us to gather the good which is offered to us in life and employ it to build a better life for ourselves and a better world for everyone. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I thank you for joining me. And we'll be back tomorrow. The Reverend Phoenix Williams Highcorrell and Reverend Alyssa Kemp Highcorrell will be my guest hosts tomorrow, and they will have fascinating conversation. Please join them, and I will see you again on Monday, or tonight on Tarot Thursday, if you join us for that.